the solution that it ought to. We were trying to get a solution to a problem, and it works.
When we appeared in the legislature, we were trying to represent the broader interest of the field. And, I was, and you were often, I think, asked, who are you representing, Mr. Jacobs?
Oh yeah, Mr. Campbell, a state senator from Southern California, and a Mormon, by the way, leaned over and said, your clients know what you're doing here. I said, no. He was shocked. I said, I'm not representing my clients here. I'm representing what's the best thing for redevelopment. We used to rewrite discovery stuff out on the wall, on the back wall of the room when they said they'd go for this, go for that. We were able immediately to know that would help the redevelopment field. And we also tell redevelopment clients they can't go beyond certain limits. You got to have a certain amount of client control, or you can't practice law properly. I had a lawyer recently who was told what to do by the redevelopment agency, and he did what they told him to do, and I said, well, that's not the law. He said, well, that's what they want. I said, you're a whore. Listen to the Chief Justice, listen to the Justice Alito and Roberts. I never saw, I could never play the game they played. But what they said was, well, at that time, that was my client. I never did a single solitary thing that was inconsistent with my ethics and what I think ought to be. It's a spirit of something that you ought to be in law schools, and we might even save the profession if this litigation nonsense keeps going. You can change and understand there's money to be made, and there's things you can do as a lawyer without being in court. Now, I don't know, we lost one case and my client wouldn't let me drop out. Well, I don't know whether you lost any, we didn't lose any, and we would go against the bad agencies that did bad things.
That's right, and most of the litigation we were involved in that went up to the California Supreme Court was all cases where the court had an opportunity to say, we're going to construe the law in such a way as to accomplish the beneficial purposes of redevelopment. The courts expanded the scope of the redevelopment law, the cases that we did bring into it. But the litigation never got anything built, and it never developed a city. And so I think our practice objectives were very similar in that regard. Stay out of court.
And back to Kelo had no business being in court. If we'd have been there, we'd have created a contract for that person, called a non-participation contract, in which they could stay in place. They let 4 or 5 owners in that place, in that case, stay in place. It had no business just jeopardizing the whole field. I'm afraid we're going to be jeopardized permanently because of that case, even though it was one and one big. It's a strange thing. If you go to litigation, think of the consequences.
I'd like to change subjects now, and because this is another area where you were in at the beginning, and that is to contrast the federal programs that began with the Housing Act of 1949 and evolved into other programs that you were instrumental in, and how we switched over to programs where we didn't need the federal funding.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing. The federal government was dominant because they were federal projects. That was not true. They were federal funded projects. They were the bank of the redevelopment agencies. They just took it over and throttled you. They ended up with 40,000 acres of unsold land.
What they did was you had to, a local jurisdiction to get a federal grant, loan and grant, had to pre-plan the area without any planners plan the area. Planners did the economics on the area. You went out and cleared the area. You acquired all the property and cleared it, and then you went to find a developer. And when a developer come in, he'd say, your plan doesn't make sense. Your land price is too high. I can't develop here. But that was the state of what the federal programs were in doing to American cities.
And also they got the most blighted areas, even in slum areas, and tried to get some new economics there. They go in the middle of a big slum area and try to sell some land in there. It wouldn't work. We developed ideas where we sold the land on the peripherals close to the good stuff, and then grow in toward this. I wouldn't want to comment by George Lefkoe, who's many of you, if you've been in land planning, you've read stuff of his. He's a leading, certainly I think in the West Coast of California, the leading professor on land use. And I talked to him a few days ago. He wanted us to ask you I'd be to give you a few answers to a few questions here. I told him I'd give him the answers afterwards if we didn't cover it here. But when I talked to him yesterday on the phone, he said, I can now drive, and he was not originally a friend of redevelopment. He said, I can now identify the redevelopment projects by driving down the street and see the good planning, the good pre-planning, the strong economics. And this was turning somebody around. I didn't even ask him about this. He just added that to it. And this also involves, as he said, all kinds of things in terms of quality of life. And you'll find that redevelopment projects are strong in your community almost no matter where you are, if you're from California. And Utah has a number of them too. For instance, this hotel, the hotel downtown, we did by redevelopment. I brought the developer up. The redevelopment runs through that hotel, the office building downtown. Downtown has 21 blocks that are in redevelopment. The whole strip out in Orem is redevelopment, running from State Street along 13 South, 1200 South, straight through there with all those used car lots, all those restaurants. That's all redevelopment. The city itself, Utah itself has a lot of redevelopment. It's very typical.
Well, over the years, the federal programs went from the big loan and grant program. They went to a model cities program that gave the power to the mayors to allocate the money, and then they went to a program that you were instrumental in having them create urban development action grants.
Yeah, I was advising Atlanta, and I discovered the next president of the United States was going to be Jimmy Carter. They all knew it was. It was amazing. They had a peanut brigade, and they knew he was going to be president. So they took our ideas and put them into a statute called UDAG. Didn't tell me about it or anything, but they did. And then they called me and asked me to run the program. I agreed to run the program, made a big mistake by not continuing through. I didn't go. But the UDAG program wrote out all of the bad things that were in the federal government's transactions. First place, it took them. I had a project that took 6 years and $6 million to get the city council to vote no. They voted no, and there was all that money wasted and spent. When we developed the UDAG program, the federal government had to operate within 6 months and approve it. Or there's going to be some problems because the law required that. It was to deal with places that are ready to have their developer and ready to build.
And the only thing missing was the final piece of the financing that UDAC provided.
Yeah, and you had, in order to have a gap, you had a gap. Well, you're just going to get into the financing.
Yeah, well, that's okay. Yeah, we can come back to that. But
that's just one last problem. The Bunker Hill is going to get a 2/3 grant on a huge project. The Watts, no way to get any tax increment going or any economics going. I discovered that this is something I don't think many people did, but I discovered that the program allowed you to take any grant you don't use and to switch it to any other federal project that existed. So what do you know? Instead of us taking a 2/3 grant, at first we took a 1/2 grant and transferred all that money to Watts. We ultimately didn't keep the grant at all. We used all tax increment for the grant.
the tax increment program, cities initially could not finance the local share of these federal programs, the matching share of federal loans and grants. And they tried, several cities, including my city, Sacramento, put general obligation bonds on the ballot for the purpose of qualifying for federal money for redevelopment.
LA
too, and they all failed. The argument for redevelopment in Sacramento at that time, after the war, was that they had the highest tuberculosis rate in the world, and it was because of the farm population that was single man, overcrowded in the old parts of Sacramento that provided the farm labor. But anyway, those failed. So a very creative solution was tax increment financing that was put on the California ballot. Very simply, the taxing agencies continued to receive the taxes they were receiving from an area before redevelopment, but after redevelopment, as the assessed values increased from investment, property taxes increased. Those property taxes are allocated to the redevelopment agency to pay for the costs of redevelopment. The power of that is illustrated by, in Sacramento, the Capitol Mall project, which took 8 blocks of blighted property as the entrance to the state capitol, redeveloped it, one single building, producing new property taxes paid for the cost of that entire project area.
Yeah, now this gets to the property tax. It could only have been done by Constitution. Property taxes are, when you look at your bill almost anywhere in the country, you look at your bill, it'll be taxes for county, taxes for school district, taxes for all the local governments, the city, that's on one bill. The tax increments are when there's an increase over the assessed value of what was there in the beginning, then you can get whatever grows out of that tax increment. The tax increment, they call it, that grows out of that increase in value. And it's tremendously powerful. And it lends itself to a great deal of creativity. You can deal with it with shopping center. You can deal with it with a developer. You can deal with it with going to other cities. You can't now, I guess. California.
Right. But what it did, ultimately, is it freed us from dependency upon the federal bank, the federal government, to provide the funding
And they felt awful about it. They felt like we were dirty guys not going along with them.
But that flexibility made our projects, and they became the model for the UDAG programs. You said they were market driven, they were done with developers, they were more flexible and faster, and you just got results. You invested the tax increments in order to get results. The tax increment financing, Gene developed. We had to develop ways to negotiate transactions with developers when they were aware that the agency would get these property taxes and have it available for putting back into projects that they would like to get some of the money for. How did you handle, or how did you deal with the developers? Talk about the role of the pro forma.
We had some people the developer every time will walk in and say, and you'll see it told, we've all seen it, we need $10 million. If they say they need $10 million, you know they don't need $10 million. So you find out what they need by getting a pro forma. Are you any of you in Kevin Murray's class? Oops. No. I was teaching that class when I was here with Kevin, and we dealt with pro formas in that class. But what you do is you find out how much money they really need, and that is getting them to give you a pro forma as to the costs and the revenues, and then by very, very fancy accounting, you arrive at some relationship to what the price is, what the price ought to be and what they needed. We call it a gap. The gap is there that they don't need, or they do need. They have to prove there's a gap that they need. They don't get anything if they can't prove a gap.
That's a process has now been embodied into the law. What was practiced became law, and now redevelopment agencies, before they make a contribution to a project participation, are required to make a public report indicating what the economists, financial people call it residual land value, what the land is worth for the project, given the costs, the revenues, the value of the project that will be developed pursuant to the agreement. But it started out as practice and then became law.
We played a trick on them, because the developer has at least four pro formas. The pro forma for buying the land and convincing them, the pro forma for their own self that they know and believe in. And a lot of them are so optimistic they can't even believe in that. Pro forma the redevelopment agency needs, because you need a lot of money with the redevelopment agency. Pro forma they've got for the lender. And I never had any one of them deny it when I claimed those four pro formas are there. So we had economics, financial guys on our side. Oddly enough, we found out that the other side never knows what we're doing, and we always know what they're doing. I'm serious. They get to the end of the negotiation, said that I didn't know that you believed that, what you said. I said, no, we believe it. You've got to believe what you're negotiating and know everything you can know about the other side. And it isn't that hard to find out. But and hopefully if they find out what you have and what you're doing, it'll be quicker and easier negotiations. The better the attorney on the other side, the better you're going to have in negotiations and lack of litigation.
I always, and I think we shared, again, similar practice styles, even though we didn't practice together, but I always felt that my role in negotiation was to solve the problem for the other guy. And in order to do that, I had to know his situation and understand his risk and his financing as well, and sometimes better than he did. And furthermore, I didn't couch negotiations in the concept of zero-sum game. It wasn't a zero-sum game. It was maximizing the resources you had available. So I always started with, let's define the project. Let's decide together what the project is we want. Now let's cost it out and do the economic. Forget who pays for what. Let's just see if the project is viable from available sources. Then we'll start talking about how we leverage public money and private money and lenders. But the negotiations on both, I think we both did this, we're educating the other side as much as we're negotiating them.
We each had a number of shopping centers, major shopping centers in major downtowns. And I was meeting with Caldecott, what's his first name?
John
Caldecott, in each of these projects, because Broadway, Hale, and Payne department stores was normally in one of those. And we could have something go wrong, and one side be cheated out of, and then we go back and we renegotiate it. When we discovered we didn't get what we meant to get. And he was the best developer's attorney I worked with.
The shopping centers are a good example of the way to not only look for creative solutions, but the way to find a better way to do something. And that idea came to me from a shopping center developer who said, every shopping center I do is a correction of the mistakes I made on the last one. It was Ernie Hahn. And so I've always felt that everything I do, I can do better the next time I come to it. Well, the shopping center problem was the major department stores were not convinced that they could come back downtown under any circumstances. You had high land costs, you had very constrained sites, you had a land assembly problem, you had, in the suburban locations, they may have 80 acres and a lot of surface parking on those 80 acres. They had a single management of all the retailing. You come downtown, and how can you present a comparable opportunity? Well, we figured out how to do it.
And they begged to be downtown.
Yeah, and two people were instrumental in convincing the department stores they could come back downtown in our projects. One was John Caldecott. The other was Jerry Lipp, also with Broadway Hale, who was the former redevelopment director of Sacramento and understood the redevelopment process. So we were able to say to department store, to shopping center developers, we can provide you the land at a price that is comparable to what you would be paying in the suburbs. We can assemble the site. Because the site's constrained, we'll have to build public structured parking, and we'll put that parking either alongside or underneath your shopping center. We'll finance it, and we will allow you to operate that public parking as part of your center, so that you will have a situation very comparable to what your major department stores are looking for.
Let's remember which department stores. Downtown Broadway department store had around 800,000 or 900,000 square feet. It was as big by itself as the shopping centers out in the suburbs.
That's right.
And when we put a downtown shopping center, these kinds of stores would drop down to 100,000, 170,000. Those are the changes that are made. And that has happened all over the country. The major shopping or department store downtown, the ZCMI is the example here, just didn't exist anymore.
And the cost of a project like that, the land assembly, again, in many cases, agencies didn't have the money to even start on these projects. So what did? We looked to the developer and asked them to pay the purchase price up front for the land.
That was one of the things, just as I was leaving, we got into, was going to the developer, said, pay for the price, right, put the price up right now. But this is after years of getting to know that we knew what we were doing. When you put the money up before we even bought one scrap of land, but we don't do kilo, we don't make a mistake of having the chance that a kilo person that holds up. We'd put it, if somebody didn't like it, we'd move the side a little bit. If somebody didn't like it, we might leave them alone. But normally, there's only about 3% of the people in any project that they're usually stuck with bad land and can get cash out from a redevelopment agency. And so it wasn't too hard after a while to get them to trust us, and it wasn't good they had to trust us, they could work alongside us, we'd work it out. Do what was necessary to make it work for them, make it work for us.
You might say that the developers were taking a big risk